When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: School sucks. User: Skit12B. Posted December 29th, 1999.
What's the dumbest thing you've ever done? Up until yesterday, mine was the time I let Jeff, my best friend since third grade, talk me into doing a flying splash off the top of our garage into the wrestling ring we'd built in our backyard. I don't remember much of the experience, mostly the air rushing past my face, then a crunch, then nothing at all. My dad said he was just coming around the corner as I hit the ground like a rag doll, and he thought I was for sure dead. Instead, I got 2 broken arms alongside a bad concussion, and that was the end of our backyard wrestling days. I thought it was also the end of our stupid shenanigans days. I was very wrong. Right now, we're off school for Christmas break. Most of my friends are staying up till 3 a.m. playing video games, then sleeping till noon. As for me, the time between Christmas and New Year's is crazy busy at Dad's bakery in the mall, and so he asked me to help out, starting Monday. I was pretty peeved about it until he also mentioned Kendra would be working alongside me. Kendra is a senior at my school. Tall, blonde, and easily one of the most beautiful girls in town. There's no way I'd ever get to know her at school. I'm a sophomore, so even if I worked up the nerve, one of the psycho senior guys would beat on me just for breaking the social order. At work, though, I might at least have a chance to talk to her. That seemed worth missing out on playing Dreamcast till my hands cramped. My first day working with Kendra was a total bust. The bakery was slammed the whole day, 0 time to talk. Yesterday, Tuesday, was slower, so I tried striking up a conversation. That's when I realized I didn't have a whole lot to say. She was stunning, even in the blue bakery apron, with her long, straight hair tied up in a bun, and something told me I wasn't going to get very far by bringing up Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. When Jeff came in to see me in the afternoon, I was desperate, and that's probably why I agreed to his idiotic plan. I was at the front counter packaging up a special order cake, so I heard Jeff before I saw him. "What's shaking, Bacon?" I taped the cake box closed and looked up at him. "Not much, dipshit. How about you?" He shrugged. "Hanging out at the food court, trying to make Fat Greg think I'm going to take a whiz in the fountain." Greg was one of the security guards at the mall. For some reason, Jeff had decided they were going to be nemesis. Before you ask, no, I don't know why. He's just like that. He would have bought it too, then Milkshake Harry had to sneak in and ruin all the fun. Milkshake Harry was one of our local homeless. Harmless though he may be, he falls under the mall's poor people are gross security policy and gets tossed out every time he stumbles his way through the doors. You don't want to know what he had to do to give the name Milkshake. Jeff shook his hair out of his eyes. "So how's it going with Lady Liberty? You asked her out yet?" He nodded at the bakery behind me where Kendra was wiping down one of the bread slicers. He called her Lady Liberty because she was tall. Again, it's just like that. Fuck off, that's how it's going. That's a no then. It's okay, Jimmy boy. I'm sure your parents will accept your alternate lifestyle. I shook my head. Eat shit, Willard. What do you want? If you're here to mooch free food, you're not helping yourself. He snorted derisively. I don't need your charity, rich man. I stole $50 from Norm's wallet when he was passed out last night. Norm was Jeff's stepdad. Isn't he going to notice that much missing? I asked. I didn't like the man or care where his money went, but he had a temper. Stealing from him was playing with fire. Nah, he was so pissed when he got home, I'm surprised he didn't spontaneously combust. No way he remembers how much he spent. Jeff was looking away from me as he said it, which was absolutely intentional. He had the worst poker face in the world. Whether or not Norm remembered wasn't the point. What was the point? You'd have to ask Jeff. Okay, so if you're not here for food, why are you here? You know my dad will kick my ass if he sees my friends hanging out here. When Jeff turned back toward me, there was a very specific madness in his eyes, a look that said, I have a great, terrible idea, and we both know you're going to go along with it. It was a look I knew well, even if I hadn't seen it since that infamous day in the backyard. Okay, so I was over at Toby Hellerman's place last night playing Dreamcast. I gave him a look of disgust. You hate Toby Hellerman. Jeff nodded vigorously. Oh yeah, he's the worst, but his mom is hot and he has a Dreamcast. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, while I was there, I overheard his brother Mike talking on the phone about the teachers at school. I think he was talking to Deborah, his girlfriend. I threw up my hands. Man, I'm working. Why do I care about any of this? All right, Dick, I thought a little build-up couldn't hurt, but no, you just want to get right in there. He was saying to Deborah that he'd heard the teachers have orgies in the staff room when the school is closed for holidays, that there was supposed to be one tomorrow, so today. He looked at me expectantly. I squinted at him, waiting for the punchline. Okay? What do you mean, okay? I just told you that our teachers are having themselves a big old fuckfest tonight at our high school, and you give me okay? Like, I just told you my bowling score? Just then, I heard Kendra's voice from the back. Did one of you guys just say fuckfest? My blood turned to ice water. The first time we've had a non-work related conversation, and it's this. She strode out of the back, a quizzical look on her delicate face. In typical Jeff fashion, he didn't miss a beat. Yeah, that was me. She cocked her head at him, clearly not used to dealing with creatures of Jeff's caliber. Why? He lit up like Christmas. Not because he liked Kendra. I've never actually known him to like anyone in that way, but because to him, this was someone asking for the plan. I overheard Mike Hellerman telling Deborah that the teachers have orgies in the high school during holiday breaks, and there's one planned for tonight. Me and Benjamin here are gonna break in to check it out. I expected Kendra to walk away or pull a whistle out of her pocket and blow it until Fat Greg came, desperate for an excuse to shoot Jeff. Instead, her eyes went wide and she gave a series of quick little nods. Yeah, I heard that too, from Rebecca Givens. Her mom works as a teacher's aide. Becca's mom says the teachers are super weird and only ever hang out with each other. She also said that sometimes when she walks into the staff room, they'll all be in there, huddled together, and they stop talking the second they see her. Imagine them crawling all over each other. Mr. Jensen with that big gut and Mrs. Welty, she's so old. You guys are gonna break in and watch that? That's badass. Gross, but badass. With that, every single argument I had against Jeff's plan, the insane idea that people being close-knit meant they were also having weird sex parties, or that a group of people who each have their own homes would choose to hold those sex parties at work, evaporated like mist. I was badass, and badass men didn't waste their time on questions. Kendra politely declined Jeff's invitation to join us, saying she was too afraid of getting caught. This should have functioned as a warning instead of doing what it did, enticing me to believe she'd find my bravery charming. My accomplice and I agreed to meet behind the high school after 11, when both my parents were guaranteed to be asleep. Dad always woke up at 3 a.m. for the bakery, so that gave us 4 hours to get into the school, explore, then come home before he could spot me sneaking back in. Later, once I was sure the coast was clear, I carefully slid open my bedroom window and lowered myself down to the back porch roof. From there, it was easy to climb down the trellis to freedom. If my parents ever figure out how often I've used that thing to sneak out, I'll be in deep shit, deeper than I am already, I mean. The bike ride from home to school is only 10 minutes, and I made sure to stay in the middle of the road just outside the streetlight's reach in case someone spotted me. It was wasted effort since I didn't see a single other person either on foot or in a car the entire ride. Our high school sits on the edge of a small wood in the middle of a long, circular driveway. Teacher parking on the way in, student parking on the way out. Between our conversation at the bakery and my leaving the house, I had rationalized to myself that if, when we got to the school, we didn't see cars in either lot, there was no reason to go any further. We could go to 7-Eleven and watch Carlos behind the counter get pissed at the amount of nacho cheese Jeff was using. That always made him feel better. I had my concession speech all planned out. And then, there, in the teacher lot, was a personal fuck you to me from God. 6 cars parked together in the furthest corner near the staff room door. I couldn't believe it. There had to be some explanation other than an orgy, didn't there? And if there wasn't, why the hell would we want to see it? Jeff's voice rang out from behind me, subtle as a sledgehammer. Success! The fuck wagons are circled. Are you ready for a Christmas miracle, pilgrim? I nearly jumped a mile. I responded in a furious whisper. Are you trying to get us arrested? He waved his hands as if dismissing the very notion of consequences. They can't arrest us for standing in a parking lot, Kimasabi. I'd like to see them try. Are you for real? Haven't you heard of loitering or just the general suspicion likely to be caused by 2 kids hanging around a bunch of parked cars in the middle of the night? His eyes narrowed and then he was over it. Well then, we better not stay out here, right? Forward, my son. He started to walk off. I sighed and followed. At the opposite end of the school from the staff room is the art room, domain of Mr. Tremblay, stoner extraordinaire. Seeing the door, I knew that was going to be Jeff's way in. Mr. T, sick of constantly locking himself out during his private smoke breaks, had sabotaged the lock. Only a select few of us knew it, and since most people aren't dumb enough to want to break into a school, fewer still cared. My final faint hope that God would make up for the parking lot thing by having someone repair the lock was dashed to pieces when Jeff turned the knob and swung the door wide open. His "the plan is in motion" grin firmly fixed in place. My friend walked into the darkness of the art room. Inside, we couldn't run the risk of turning any lights on, so our only option was to wait until our eyes adjusted before moving forward. I could hear Jeff breathing. A question occurred to me. Jeff? Yeah? Why do you want to see our teachers, I've never seen you show any interest in getting it on before this. Yeah, it doesn't do anything for me. The thought of actually having sex, gross. Right, sure, so why this then? Man cannot live on Dreamcast alone. Nothing else was forthcoming, and really I shouldn't have been surprised. The room was coming fully into view, black fading into discernible shades of gray. We were standing in the coat room, which was separated from the main art studio by a heavy velvet curtain. Jeff was about to push it aside and continue his march toward the staff room when we both heard a blood-curdling scream from within the school. It echoed over and over, freezing us both in our tracks. It came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of someone running. We looked at each other. Those steps were coming our way. Say what you will about the guy, but Jeff has great survival instincts, and whatever this was activating them. He pointed to the door behind me, and we were just about to make our exit when the footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, I thought I heard gasping, and Jeff must have too, because his face had the same quizzical look as mine. Our curiosity got the better of us, and we crept up to the curtain, peeping out from either side. From our vantage point in the coat room, we could make out almost the whole studio, from Mr. T's desk at the front to the heavy wooden double doors at the back. It was dark and quiet, with not a thing out of place. Then, all hell broke loose. Those big double doors blew inward as something large and heavy was tossed through them, hitting the floor hard and skidding to a stop in the middle of the floor. I covered my mouth, stifling a gasp. Without any light, it was hard to identify the dark heap on the ground as being anything at all. God, apparently, just waking up from a hard-earned nap, chose that moment to start answering my prayers, and the fluorescent lights in the studio flared into brightness. I was still rubbing the spots out of my vision when Jeff figured out what we were looking at. Jesus, Ben, that's Milkshake Harry. Cautiously pulling the curtain aside, I looked again into the now bright room, and sure enough, that was him. Every bit of exposed skin had deep claw marks in it, like it'd been mauled by an animal. He was groaning weakly, trying to get to his feet. What the hell had happened to him? A moment later, the answer came floating through the door. Yes, you read that right. Floating. All 12 of the full-time teaching staff, from the previous discussed porker Mr. Jensen and little old Mrs. Weltsy to tall, lanky Mr. Curtin from the math department and the little blonde heartbreaker who ran the drama department, Mrs. Eau Claire, floated into the room, their feet a good 6 inches above the ground. They touched down in a circle around Milkshake Harry, who hadn't been able to move from the place he'd landed. Mr. Washburn, the gym teacher, was the first one to speak. He sounded completely normal, like he was telling someone to run laps for being late to class. We warned you, Harry, didn't we warn you? Cooperate like a good boy and you get paid. Not only do you get paid, but you get to live. If you call this living, but no, you had to grow a conscience, didn't you? Who did you tell about us, Harry? Don't lie. I'll know. Harry was laying on his back now, speaking too softly for me to hear. Mr. Washburn could obviously make it out just fine. He was nodding along thoughtfully, his hands on his hips. Okay, that's not bad. We can contain that. Mrs. Dern from the science department spoke up. Are you sure, Terry? Mr. Washburn rolled his eyes. Yes, Jill, I'm sure. You worry too much. If you weren't dead already, I'd be worried about your blood pressure. Bent at the waist, wrapping a thick hand around Harry's neck before dragging him straight up and off the ground. Harry's face was already red, his hands ineffectually scrabbling at Mr. Washburn's in a doomed attempt to loosen his grip. I looked over at Jeff, who looked as frightened as I was. Dead already? Floating? Whatever this was, it wasn't an orgy. Jeff started pointing frantically back at the studio, and I turned just in time to see Mr. Washburn's already open mouth distended further to reveal a prominent pair of razor-sharp teeth in the top and bottom of his jaw. Fangs. Jesus fucking Christ, he had fangs. With a soft pop, he sank those fangs into Milkshake Harry's neck. The poor guy's legs kicking pointlessly in midair. The teacher's Adam's apple bobbed in his throat, rivulets of blood trickling down from where his lips met the other man's skin. He was really doing it. He was drinking his blood. Harry gurgled as life was slowly drained from his body. I turned to Jeff, our eyes meeting. He mouthed the words I'd just been thinking. The teachers are goddamn vampires. There was no way around it. The living dead were running our high school. A million questions swarmed through my mind about how they could be outside in daylight, how often they had to eat, how many others there were. Multiple audible sucking sounds managed to distract me from that particular train of thought, and I carefully pulled the curtain aside enough to see that Harry was back on the ground, now joined by all the other teachers. They were latched onto his veins like leeches. He was still moving, though it couldn't have been much more than nerves. Final, spastic twitches from a dying man. Mr. Washburn was at the far end of the room, tugging at something I couldn't see. A moment later, he came back, having wrenched the long paper cutter free from its guard. Come on, finish up. It's time for the fun part. The other teachers reluctantly pulled back, their faces slick, eyes bright. They were breathing heavily. Milkshake Harry was gone, his open eyes staring sightlessly. Without a word, Mr. Washburn waved the paper cutter as if to tell the others to back up. They did, standing and moving away from the body. It was hard to know what to look at next because at the same time as they all started undressing, the gym teacher began using the paper cutter to dismember their victim. And as bad as that was, it got worse when they used the pieces of each other's bodies like paintbrushes, creating elaborate loops and whirls out of the dead man's blood. Oh yeah, then they fucked. It turns out it was an orgy after all. Sorry to disappoint the Anne Rice fans out there, but I'm not going to give you a play-by-play on this, the worst orgy in history. I could because Jeff and I had no choice but to sit in the coat room and wait until they were done before we could leave. Hours they were at it, hours of belly rolls, wrinkles, and gray pubes rubbing against each other like they were trying to start a campfire. Eventually, when it was all over, they gathered up their clothes and I heard Mr. Washburn say, "Time to hit the showers," before slapping Mr. Jensen's flat, flabby ass. One of them switched the lights out as they left, leaving us in the dark with the thoroughly violated remains of one Milkshake Harry and our own innocence. We barely spoke on the walk home. What was there to say? Any one word spoken out loud might conjure up memories of what we'd just seen, and neither of us wanted that. My bike is still out there in the woods. I imagine I'll go grab it at some point. Or not. Who cares? I have a much more pressing problem. What do you do with a school of vampires?
Subject: a crack in the world. User: Gills18D. Posted April 18th, 1998.
What I have to tell you isn't a story so much as it is a series of random images and impressions I can't explain. First, let me say there's nothing about my home or even the town I live in that's even remotely interesting. Rosemont was a town started out of spite that succeeded against all odds and reason. To help you understand the kind of place it is, consider the fact we have more motel rooms than residents. You understand now why it's the last place I'd expect to find a crack in the world. It started with my daughter, Rosie. We were home together on a Saturday while my wife, Janine, was out at the mall with the girls. My practice is going well, just not quite hired help well, so most of the weekly household responsibilities fall on Jan. Saturday is her day to enjoy total freedom from those responsibilities, which I love because it makes her happy and gives me time alone with my daughter. That wasn't something my old man did with me, and I will not repeat his mistakes. Around midday, just before lunch, we were in the living room. Rosie on the floor by the side window, building something out of Lego, me in my big chair, reading the Saturday Tribune. The article was about Mayor Daley playing coy as to whether or not he was planning to run for a third term, a bit of political theater that annoyed me so much I folded the paper and tossed it aside in disgust. That's when I saw Rosie pressed up against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "What you looking at, Rosie?" I asked. She made that I don't know sound kids sometimes do when their attention is elsewhere. Rosemont is a suburb, and the only thing between our house and the neighbor was a couple dogwood trees. Whatever she was looking at wasn't that. I stood up, wincing as my joints popped. Surely, I thought, these couldn't be the same knees that used to play college basketball day in and day out. Walking off the stiffness, I went over to Rosie and put a hand on her shoulder. "What is it, kiddo?" She pressed her index finger against the glass. I looked where she was pointing, not seeing anything out of the ordinary. There was the Douglases' house, their kitchen windows covered by heavy winter shutters just visible through the dogwoods. Oh, there it was, a thin, white vertical line between the trees just above the snow line. Initially, I thought I was seeing a reflection on the glass, but when I tried to wipe it away, it didn't go anywhere. I frowned. Maybe it was a reflection from somewhere else. Before I could consider any other mundane possibilities, the line began to widen at the center, like our view of the yard was a curtain someone was pushing aside, from behind which shined a brilliant white light. Rosie made a noise of surprise. Even though it was a cool day, I suddenly felt sweaty all over. There was now a widening void in our yard. When you're confronted with the impossible, the best you can do is try to apply mundane solutions, and so the rational part of my brain was trying to determine which agency you called for something like this. Was this a fire department problem, the cops, the Ghostbusters? Rationality ended with the appearance of the men. There would be 8 in all, in varying heights, none of them unusually tall or short. What made them unusual was they had no features. Instead, they were a brilliant, shining pink from head to toe. They marched in single file from the front yard, each of them resting a hand on the shoulder of the one in front of them. Seeing them wasn't frightening like you'd expect. Instead, it gave me a feeling of wonder and joy I hadn't felt since the day Rosie came into the world. One by one, the line of figures stepped through the gap and was swallowed up by the brilliant light until they were gone. With that, the hole began to narrow, the curtains closing behind them. Within seconds, it was gone, leaving nothing behind. Rosie sat back from the window, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She looked up at me, smiling. "Daddy, were those angels?" We weren't a religious family. Neither Janine nor I had grown up that way, and we had decided to let Rosie come to us when she began to have questions about faith. Here it was, and in actual living color. I thought about it. There hadn't been any wings or harps or floating cherubs, and yet, was it my imagination, or did the day seem brighter despite the low December clouds? More hopeful. The stiffness in my knees seemed to be gone. There's so much bad in this world, so many agents of cruelty. Why was it so hard to believe there could be agents of goodness, too? I looked down at my little girl. "You know, baby, I think they were."
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.